You're listening to the Zen Cop Podcast.
Guys, welcome back. Mac Rollins here. This is the Zen Cop Podcast, Season 2, Episode 16. I'm back. Had a little bit of an intermission there. There's a lot going on, as you guys can see via Instagram. There's a lot of really cool things coming down the pipe, but I'm happy to be back, and I'm pretty stoked because I have Darrel Lambert on the show today. Looking forward to having some really cool conversations. On that note, this episode is brought to you by Kendrick Knives, quality-made American. Just joking. Sean is not a sponsor of the show. However, he is the nexus as to how Darrel and I were able to start communicating and ultimately have him on the show. So a shout out to Kendrick Knives and a shout out to Sean Kendrick himself for setting this up. Darrel, I'm super pumped to have you on the show. The bio that I want to read is too long, so I'll probably have you do it for me. But let's get into it, man. Darrel Lambert, for the audience and the people who don't know, let's sort of talk about how you came to be involved in this crazy world of law enforcement. And yeah, man, give us a quick intro and thank you for being here.
Yeah, sure. So it was never in the cards for me to be a police officer. I don't know if we want to go before the police department, but once I passed a recruiting car on the side of the highway, I had taken my LSATs to go to law school, and I realized to get in-state tuition after I moved to Texas, it was going to be a lot cheaper if I was a resident. And so I passed a recruiting car, and I said, I'd do that for a couple of years, get in-state tuition, be fine. So I signed up, and that was 17 years ago. I've loved it. It's been a great job. There's been negatives, of course, but it's really been far more interesting and rewarding than I thought it would be. So I came out of the academy in 2008. And then I worked patrol. I was night shift patrol for about 2.5 years. A lot of experience there. I speak Spanish, and I was always getting thrown into just a variety of calls, even beyond what a lot of other guys were doing by virtue of that, because you'd get sent around the city because they needed Spanish speakers or whatever. And so I worked nighttime for about 2.5, and one day I was nailing furniture together at 3 a.m. And I can still see it. I have a terrible memory, but I can see the furniture that I'm nailing together, and I see the tile floor I'm on. It's 3 a.m. I was like, this is ridiculous. I don't want to work nights anymore. And so I had a friend of mine who was on a neighboring shift, and he had been recruiting me. So I went over to that. I went evening patrols for about 2.5. And then I got recruited over to the Metro TAC unit. They had formed a new one. And so Metro TAC's like kind of plainclothes vice sort of thing. We do really light undercover, no like changing of names or, like deep stuff. It's just really looking crappy and buying crack or heroin or whatever. A lot of funny things happen there, which we could go into. And then I got an invitation. A sergeant I really admired. And there's so many, layers of the onion that we could peel if we wanted to. But he actually recently committed suicide, which was a big loss for us. Really admired him. But anyway, he was an awesome cop, and he recruited me over to gang unit. I was on gang unit for 4 years as an officer. So we would, the detectives were on the Safe Streets Task Force. So they would, they would do wiretaps or like regional stuff related to gangs and narcotics and things like that. They would also do, murder investigations and just anything that came up. But on the street officer level, we would assist with takedowns, things like that. And then we also were tasked with documenting gang members. We would do we'd make a lot of felony arrests and, look for drugs and criminal activity when things were quiet. And then after about 4 years of that, I wasn't growing. I'd come to my 10-year mark as an officer, and I said it's time to promote. So I took a test and I promoted to detective in 2018. I had done rideouts. I didn't prepare well for the promotion, and that I didn't know what I was going to do. I didn't realize I was going to promote so quickly, and so like off of the list that was made. So I did rideouts and I found child abuse. Where after a week of a ride out there, I was like, oh man, I got to come here. This work matters. It was a real game changer for me. There were 5 spots, and I speak Spanish, and they need Spanish speakers. And I was like, oh, I'll definitely get one of these spots. But I overestimated my chances on that, I guess. So I took the first spot available, which was nighttime violent crimes, and I am grateful for it. Sometimes through adversity, you end up learning and growing a lot more. So anything that got shot, stabbed, or robbed in the nighttime in my city, we'd investigate. Went in with very little training, very little oversight, and made it work. Made it work. I met my partner with the #1 rated bromance in the department, Val de los Santos. We teamed up over there. And, we learned together. We learned and investigated. Interview and interrogation became a big part of our daily activities. And once about 10 months in, maybe 9, 10 months in, another child abuse spot came open, and I applied to that and went over there. So I've been in child abuse as a detective since fall of 2018. And I'm still there now. So yeah, just through there, I've been investigating physical and sexual abuse of children. We also investigate injury to the elderly, and more and more got involved in interview and interrogation, such that my partner Val and I now have a business called Modern Interviewing Solutions, where we train both, obviously not under the LLC. We train at the department as the main instructors, and then under LLC, we train on the road. So that's my sort of brief introduction to me.
That's awesome. The one thing that really caught my attention, going back to the beginning, I haven't met a lot of cops who are interested in law school and then law enforcement. It's usually the other way around. Some of the attorneys that I've met with and worked with over the years, they usually do cop stuff first, and then they transition. In your earlier years, what drew you towards the justice system in terms of wanting to be an attorney?
I think you're giving me too much credit for the thought that I put into my future path. Both my parents were lawyers. They used it more as kind of a supplemental to what they did. My dad was mainly in banking, and my mom was in teaching, and so just because they did it, it wasn't like they made it a big thing. But I think it was always in my head. And then once I was finishing college, I went to Wesleyan University up in Middletown, Connecticut. And as I was finishing college, it seemed really portable. You could practice law at one place and then move to another place if you needed to. And I liked that. And it seemed like it would pay pretty well, which I think I overestimated how much lawyers get paid at the time, because a lot seemed like they make about as much as I make as an officer. So yeah.
And that's and I'm not sure if I said this in the beginning, but you're in Texas.
I'm in Texas. I'm from Kentucky originally. I went to school in Connecticut, college. And then after college, I was living down in South America for about a year and came back and moved to Texas. And it was a very silly story about how I ended up in Texas, but I'm here. So
yeah, South America. What were you doing down in South America?
So I was teaching English, traveling, hanging out. There was my dad turned me on to the program. He had heard about, we have family contacts down in Ecuador because we had an exchange student, mid 90s, late 90s, something like that. And we'd formed friendships with that family and had traveled down there before. So he heard about this program where you would basically go and pay for the class to learn how to teach English as a second language, which was, pretty cheap. It was South America. And then once you finished, you would have a job teaching there. So it was just teaching rich kids in South America English and traveling around and having fun. So
Nice. So there's a lot to unpack, and I want to. We talked about keeping things to certain discussion points, and one of the things that I wanted to talk to you about was the interview and interrogation stuff, and I think that's going to be a topic of discussion for a lot of agencies in the years to come. I think that we're seeing changes kind of across the board, nationally, internationally to some degree too, because one of the instructors that taught our class recently, it was for a science-based interviewing class, he was from the UK. And so we're seeing a lot of really different things popping up. And for the listeners on my show, I would say it's kind of split down the middle in terms of people who are in law enforcement and people who are not. And I think one of the largest misconceptions outside of CSI when it comes to the cop world that we see on TV and TV shows and movies is how unrealistic some of those scenarios are, and some of the things that people don't understand. And there's even a strange way when I say interview and interrogation. The interrogation word tends to freak people out. They think about illegal detentions. They think about phone books and just this very strange, sort of ominous procedure that Hollywood has managed to create over the years. But I really want to pick your brain for a number of reasons. Number one, your study and just kind of your overall knowledge of all of that, not to mention the book you're writing, which I want to talk about eventually as well. But let's dive into that. Interview and interrogation and what it does for modern policing. I mean, can we talk about some of the things that you've done over the years, or just any stories you want to share? Because when I sort of put this out there initially, I had a few guys from surrounding agencies where I work that really wanted to see what it's like in other states, and if there's things that are different or changing. And anything you want to share on that would be fantastic.
Yeah, so like you said, the science-based stuff is if you want to sell an interview course now to a department, if you're not saying science-based, you're not getting signed up.
Yep.
That's just it's a buzzword, and a lot of it is is good. There is a tension between the PhDs that are studying this and the practitioners, and there's always going to be. It's that ivory tower kind of meets the street sort of thing. And I think one of the things that my partner and I have done well is bridging that gap, where we're looking at what the scientists are saying. We're anything that's practical and science based, we're applying. But some of the science based stuff is gets a little into navel gazing and a little less action. And so interview and interrogation is an important part of the criminal justice process. If you're going to accuse somebody of a crime, at a certain point you investigate a crime and a person's been identified as a possible suspect, and that possible really it could be, by the time you're interviewing them in a controlled setting, that could be that they're a 40% likelihood up to they definitely did it. You got them on video with all the evidence, and so that interview process is a chance to test the evidence that you have that's linked that person to the crime versus what their statement is. It's really important. And one of the things that I found and that I stepped into it as an instructor is that there's a lot of misconceptions. There's a lot of really earnest people that are trying to do their best, but with really haphazard training. And so about a couple years into it, I stepped into it as an instructor. I had a mentor that helped me a lot, Trent Watts. He teaches for Dr. Rhodes now under a business called Spotting Lies, but he was the APD instructor, and I learned a lot from him, and I ended up stepping into a teaching role maybe 3 years into it, I realized that there was a big demand for what he was teaching, but he's one person and there wasn't enough of them to go around. And I was watching real time as detectives were struggling with their interviews. They're kind of interviewing based on like water cooler wisdom or, whatever. And a lot of times ineffectively in ways that'd be very easy to clean up. And so I stepped into it and I said, well, I have some experience and I can teach to this. And it was really interesting. At the time, there were a lot of people that were very resistant to anybody teaching except for Trent. And it was funny because when I put together my first course, Trent was sitting in the front row. I mean, if anybody was my biggest fan, it was him. He was there and very supportive. But afterwards, he was getting calls saying, "Hey, what's this guy doing? He's not you. Like, did you say that he could do this?" And I never understood that. I mean, if I have knowledge and people want it, then you should be able to teach that. So anyway, my whole thing for interview and interrogation has always been to avoid tricks, to avoid an overemphasis on body language and things like that. Which there's a place for body language. Please don't get me wrong, but not to the exclusion of working the fundamentals. And so that's why I ended up the manuscript I've written for a book is called Fundamentals of Interview and Interrogation. It's what we call our course 2 under Modern Interviewing Solutions. But the idea is that you can be very successful in the interview room if you work the fundamentals, which has to do with things like preparation, making sure that you set the room up right, making sure that you do a proper greeting, build rapport, maintain rapport. I mean, that's one of the science-based things that for sure should be done. The research has said that there's about an 81% greater information yield on interviews where rapport is built and maintained throughout. So that's kind of a common thing that guys will do wrong where, they went to a course and the course said, ask them what their favorite football team is and then just ask them if they, stabbed the guy or whatever. It's like, rapport is different than that. It's more than that. It's more than just asking really silly questions that, you don't, where are you from? Like, okay, like that's sure, maybe that's part of it, but building that rapport, is something that we could get into. But yeah, it's absolutely a part of interviewing. And what's interesting, and you're talking about the Europeans. So the Europeans and the Canadians have all moved away from accusatory interrogation. So the typical divide is an interview is a non-accusatory search for information, and interrogation is an accusatory testing of those statements. Is how I would say it. And so, so the Europeans and Canadians are not doing any sort of accusatory interrogation. I think that might be the future in the United States. I hope not. I think that that's kind of where the scientists and the practicality of interviewing, I think there's some tension there because we all know almost intuitively, if you've ever in your personal life had somebody do something wrong, do they ever just come out and say it even when you confront them? No, a lot of times you have to say, hey, look, I know what you did. And they're like, okay, I did it.
If you have kids, you're going to do that every week.
Yeah. And one thing I tell people in the class that we teach, I say, hey, look, do your best. Don't interrogate your wife or your kids, keep that in the office. But yeah, I think there's a role for it. And one of the reasons that we continue to teach it, and we have kind of our own spin on it, is that it's still part of the American criminal justice judicial process. I'm in a very liberal county, and my interrogations, whether accusatory or otherwise, are subjected to suppression hearings, and every single one has made it through. And I've been to multiple cases where that interrogation features prominently. And so I mean, here's the deal: if it's still an accepted part of the process and it's still expected inside the United States, why would we not teach it? And I think a lot of the science-based guys, like Federal Law Enforcement Training Center, FLETC, they're putting out a lot of the science-based stuff too, um, and they're like. They find it abhorrent almost that you're going to move into this sort of theme-based accusation, but here's the deal. It's part of the process. So
Yeah.
when it becomes not part of the process, then we'll move away from it. And so I think we're doing a disservice to our people to not provide some training in how to do it. Um, and yeah, and just as like two final things I want to kind of plug, and then I know there's some stuff to unpack in there. One, when it comes to accusatory interrogations, the Innocence Project, which is no friend to law enforcement, or
Yeah.
again, intention with. I'm not trying to create enemies or anything, but intention with. Highly suspicious of law enforcement. They have said, and it's on their website. You can go look at it. They say the average length of an interrogation leading to a false confession is 16 hours. 16 hours. Okay, so here's the deal. If we're just going to get rid of accusatory interrogations because 16-hour interrogations are leading to false confessions, I mean, a typical interrogation is going to be maybe 2 to 4 hours, anywhere in there.
Mm-hmm.
And my second point that I want to make there, so that's one, is that I think that there's still a place for accusatory interrogations. Is that interview and interrogation is the kind of stuff they make movies about. It's fun. Like there are times where it's fun. It's very stressful. It's takes a lot of focus. But people will say the most surprising things. I mean, it's there's a reason why they make television shows about this stuff. It's because it's high drama. It's very tense. It's definitely a mind game, and I think I think it's something that people should want to learn about and should want to improve their game to make sure that their stuff holds up.
Yeah. I one thing that I do want to go back to, the false confession stuff. So I the movie My Cousin Vinny. I don't know if everyone's seen that
Yeah,
or not, but there's that I shot the clerk, I shot the clerk, I shot the clerk.
Yeah,
That's
right.
I mean, and the false confession stuff is so rare. It's rare, but it's very serious, and it's very scary when it
Yes.
happens, because it's it can send people to prison for something they essentially didn't do. And the Innocence Project, yeah, they've done some things that have exonerated people, but the majority of what they're doing is instilling doubt in the process when they know damn well that the person did exactly what they did. Um, when it comes to false confessions, and I think the overall concern for the science-based stuff, the root, I guess, if there was sort of a cause, that would be one of the big ones. They're trying to avoid that. But in your opinion, I mean, I'm of the opinion that false confessions are very rare, and a 16-hour interrogation. I've heard of lengthy interviews, but that's a long time for anybody involved in that process. And I don't think people understand how that, if it does happen, it's probably a very small margin compared to the other interviews. And I mean, you and I have probably both seen homicide interviews that have been less than 4 hours with a confession.
Oh, yeah.
And
Oh, yeah.
I also don't think that the majority of people outside cop world understand that confessions are not common. In fact, I would say they're rare, a true full out confession. And we could talk about exculpatory lies and all that stuff, but like you said, I think the media stuff, the movies, they do tend to sort of make this a big deal. But in terms of actual false confessions, would you say that's sort of one of the driving factors socially that created this movement behind most of the science-based stuff? Because I know in the UK they cannot lie to people, correct?
I think that's true.
Yeah.
And I do know that there's a guy named Saul Kassim, Kassin. He's like, if you look up false confession, he's like the most cited person in any of the US based stuff. He wrote a book called Duped on false confessions. And one of the recommendations that he had, like as a his number one recommendation was everything should be video and audio recorded. So, okay, we're all on board with that, right? Unless the guy confesses to you and I don't know, on the way to the bathroom or something,
Sure.
which happens.
It happens, yeah.
It happens. And we have ways to address that too. But and then I think it's in the top 2 or 3 or whatever, is getting rid of lying and inside of police interviews. And I'm warm to that idea. I rarely lie in an interview.
And not to interrupt, but for the people who are out of this world or out of the law enforcement community, when we say lying, I think that lying has that it's a word that's usually associated to, just like I would say deception and immoral policing. But when we say lying, I mean, we're talking more about a ruse or, we're not necessarily doing it to be unethical, but more so to incite a response or for them to, essentially admit. If we say we had surveillance footage of so-and-so at this location, even though we didn't, could we talk a little bit more about lying and why it's good and also why it's bad?
Well, I don't really take so it can be good because I guess if I were to steel man the argument for why lying is good, it would be that, it's hard to resist.
Sure.
One thing I like to point out to people is that, I think there's some common errors that detectives will make, when they interview people because they don't want to let on what they know. And one of the things I point out is if the person did it, they know they did it. All right. There's no surprise here. You're not going to, some guys, for example, they really want to wait to reveal the nature of the investigation until the person's sitting in the room. And then they say, you are here because of this sexual abuse allegation or whatever. And they think it's going to be a real shock and awe moment, but it's probably because they're decent people that don't rob or sexually assault people. But if you did the crime, you did the crime. So it's not surprising. So anyway, lying can be effective in that sense. It's sort of you're caught sort of a thing. But it does feature prominently, and this is something that Saul Qasim points out, it features prominently in false confessions. In terms of lying, is that there was a court case, Frazier v. Cup, from the 60s. It's 69. Where the police officers lied about having, I think it was like blood or something. It was pre-DNA. So I think they had like this killer piece of evidence or whatever. And they lied to the person and he ultimately admitted. So he took it up to the Supreme Court and the Supreme Court ruled that it was the fact that the police lied did not, mean that the confession needed to be suppressed, and so they allowed it. And so since then, it's part of the process. Now, you cannot fabricate evidence, and so in that sense, you can say, and again, I rarely lie, and I could give examples of it, but I rarely do. And if I do, it'd usually be like a small thing or something, and I disclose to the prosecutors and everything.
Sure.
But because it's a real credibility killer if that person knows you're lying or whatever. But so you could say, for example, let's say you wanted to lie. You could say, I have your DNA on the victim at the crime scene, whatever. But what you can't do is at least in Texas, you can't print out a piece of paper that shows DNA hit confirmed with the person's name on it, because then you've fabricated evidence. You've created something that's not true. And so that's a felony offense, and you could get yourself in legal trouble for fabricating. But yeah, so it doesn't look great for a jury because you got your shiny badge and you're up there saying that you're credible and believable and all that. And then, the defense loves to point out, but you were lying, didn't you? And you say, yes, sir, I was lying. And, so that's kind of lying in a nutshell.
Yeah. And thinking about some of the newer guys, I do have a lot of listeners who I think are in the newer generation of cop stuff. And, when it's the opposite, I mean, let them lie, especially when you know they're lying. I feel like a lot of guys want to attack that and talk about
Yes.
it, but no, exculpatory. Let them talk. And
Yes.
if they're talking, I mean, I'm sure this is something you'll agree with. Just let them keep talking. Don't stop them. Let them keep going. And like you pointed out earlier, if you say something that is a lie and they know damn well that it's not, then they just lost everything's out the window for the next 20 minutes, because they're going to basically write you off as, no, this obviously he doesn't know what he's talking about, especially if it's something very accusatory um, in their mind. But for someone who's new to interviewing, and I think a lot of times the patrol guys will sort of discredit themselves, thinking that they're not going to be able to make an impact on the road in a field interview. It's kind of like the whole mindset that I think, going back again to movies and TV shows, where it's only serious if you're in the interview room, you're in the box, you got these suits that are talking to you. What would you say to a newer guy on the street who is trying to do his very best in the field, doesn't really have access to the interview room for whatever reason? What could you offer them as advice in terms of some of the basics, just some top 5 or top 3 things they can hit in a field interview where they could see that case go to, a prosecution level where the DA would like it? Anything you can say for those guys who are listening?
Yeah, so this isn't necessarily the number one thing, but I don't want to forget to say it. So I'm going to lead with it, which is that they need to know what the expectations of their investigative units are. So, for example, homicide is not going to like you interviewing their person. Okay,
No.
like so, obviously. But for example, family violence.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times, yeah, of course, they expect you to do the most thorough interview, at least in my department. And so you want to know what the expectations of your unit are, and whether or not you should be interviewing that person is number one. Number two, you need to slow down. So they've done studies, and the average police officer interrupts within 7.5 seconds of asking a question. So a typical thing is, you go to family violence, woman, man, whatever, is bleeding from the face, and you say, "Hey, what happened?" And she goes, "Well, my husband hit me." And the first, before she's still talking, and you go, "Well, did it hurt? Where did he hit you? What did he hit you with? Where is he?" And it's just this constant interruption, instead of, and it puts the interviewee in the passive chair, and they should be the most interesting person. So number one, slow down and don't interrupt. Okay, so when you ask a question, "Hey, what happened?" Let them talk. Okay, let them talk all they need to, and get out your notepad and write down things you want to follow up on. So she says, "He hit me." You might put on your notepad, "hit question mark," and you'll go back and say, "How did he hit you? Where did he hit you?" All this stuff later. So start with open questions, and then once they get to the end of it, instead of going back to those closed questions. So an open question is, "Tell me everything that happened," and they get to choose their adventure on that, right? And a closed question is, "Did it hurt?" Right? That's a yes or no. So that's what I'm saying when I'm talking open and closed questions. So you get to the end of that first open question, and then instead use a little encourager to continue, ask them to continue going on. Go on. What else? And then, right? And you'll be surprised. People will sound like they're at the end of a story, and that's all that happened. And you'll go, "What else?" And then, "Well, also, these other things happen," and they go on, and then get to the end of the story. So that would be one: is be patient, don't interrupt, and avoid the closed questions until you've given them a chance to answer as much as possible. And then I would also encourage people to work to build a little bit of rapport. This goes back to patience. And so this is a common objection that I'll get from patrol officers, where, "Well, we don't have time for this. We got calls holding or whatever."
Mm-hmm.
So rapport can be as simple as something from motivational interviewing, which is, you might know, I think that you said you had a little bit of a therapy background, but, with motivational interviewing, one thing you can do is you can go to, whether it's a suspect or a victim, you can say, "Hey, look, turn down your radio, tell your partners you need a couple minutes, if the scene's secure and whatever. Safety is first." Okay. Actually, safety, if anything is first, safety is first. Make sure you're safe. But then say, hey, look, is it okay if we talk over here? Yeah, that's okay. Is it okay if I call you Amanda or whatever? Just these little things where that you're giving them autonomy, and it doesn't take that much. And so you could even, I think it helps build rapport to provide the person context, even if it's a suspect, right? Let's say the family violence, and you go interview the suspect and you Mirandize them or don't, whatever your policies are. And then you might say, hey, look, I came at you pretty heavy on this call. I understand that you got put in handcuffs. That's just a safety thing, okay? I've had things go badly before, and so we have to kind of start out up here, but now we're back down here. So are you hurt at all? Little things like that. And I know, it, you know, people, for whatever reason, people resist it, but I'm telling you, it matters a lot to people if you can check in with them. And all of this goes to, it has a tactical purpose as well, which is that now the person sees that you are at least somewhat concerned. You've given them information, you provide a little context, and then you ask them to go on. Okay, so I want you to know that I'm not judging you. Okay, I know that maybe you ended up in handcuffs pretty quickly here, but I haven't made any final decisions. Okay, this could go a lot of different ways, and it really matters what you have to say. So I'm going to listen, and if you have anything that shows that you didn't have anything to do with this, I'm going to listen to that. Okay. And then we'll go over some of the information, the evidence that I came up with on my end that shows that maybe you did. And if it's wrong, then you just tell me how it's wrong. It takes a minute. It takes literally a minute. And it's similar to what we'll use in what we call a pre-Miranda monologue, where, especially when talking to a suspect, if you can increase curiosity, which is, I want to show you the evidence that we have. Okay, I want to talk about that with you. And then you want to increase hope, which is, if you didn't have anything to do with it, you just point me, help me prove that. And then you reduce fear. Okay, so you want to increase curiosity, increase hope, and decrease fear. And that might be something as simple as, you're safe. You're safe over here. Okay. You're not going to be mistreated. You're not going to be judged. We're going to hear what you have to say.
Can we talk about Miranda real quick? I think there's, for
Sure.
the audience who doesn't know, can you talk about Miranda and kind of origins and why it's important and why it's not?
Yeah, sure. I want to get to that just real quick on the patrol thing is just that it's though, if you do those steps, stop interrupting, make sure that they have space to answer that question, and then if you can build a little bit of rapport with that person, which can just be like, hey, here's a little bit about me. And I'm not saying tell them, your whole family situation, but hey, look, I've been a police officer for a while and I've seen a lot of different things. So I'm not here to judge you. I'm here to listen. Those types of things go a long way towards getting people to talk. Okay. Now, when it comes to Miranda, it's, I think Miranda was a 60s decision. Yeah. I think it was Ernesto Miranda, and I forget. I know he got out and then got convicted of like rape or something later. I forget what the initial one was. But anyway, essentially, if a person is in custody, it's a three-pronged thing. In custody, 1, by police, 2, and being questioned, 3, then you have to advise them of their rights. Okay. So it doesn't apply if they're in custody by police and you're not asking questions. It doesn't apply if you're in custody by loss prevention and being asked questions because they ain't police, right? And so those rights vary a little bit. The way that they're read, as far as I know, I know for certain there's not a single standardized national advisement, but that's all. You have a right to a lawyer. You have the right to remain silent. You don't have to make any statement at all. Anything you say can and will be used against you in court. All those kinds of things are your Miranda warnings. And so if it's in custody, now this is something we could get into later if you want, but as an investigator, your interviews are usually split between non-custodial and custodial. Mm-hmm. So custodial, you've been picked up on a warrant and I want to ask you about the case. You're in custody by police and being questioned. I got to read your Miranda. Okay. In a non-custodial setting, you do not have to read Miranda. Okay. Now this could be agency specific. So everything that I say here is, you got to know policy,
policy,
and
yeah.
your DAs and all that stuff,
Yeah.
right? But at least in Texas and at least where I work, and this is based on Supreme Court ruling too, is that if they're not in custody, like you invite them in. Most of my cases in child abuse, I invite the person in. I'd say, I don't know, 60-70% are non-custodial. They come in, and I let them know that they're free to go at any time. They don't have to make a statement. But I don't formally read them Miranda because they're not in custody. So
I think that's where a lot of people, usually from Hollywood, I wasn't read my rights. And I just think that that's a misconception. But again, going back to your three-pronged, detention being the key, that no, you are detained, you're not free to leave. If you were to go interview someone in a parking lot at Walmart, and you're questioning them, they're free to go at their own free will. I think that that's a pretty standard national practice. But when we're talking about detention and the Miranda advisement, and I think that's where some of the newer, even though it's not a difficult concept to understand, I feel like some of the newer cops are very afraid to dive into that pool, and so maybe sometimes they don't interview, or they're afraid to get too deep into a topic that they're. And again, I'm not speaking specifically to an agency, but I think overall that's the theme that I've seen. You mentioned call volume. I think there's a lot of things that are sort of killing that, not to change gears, but are sort of killing the drive to interview. I think that there's a lot of guys who don't want to get that phone call from the sergeant saying, "Hey, what's taking so long?" And you're saying, "Well, I'm trying to do a good interview." And especially you brought up the domestic violence stuff, which we all know 9 times out of 10, it's not going to be very cooperative during the contact. You'll usually see cooperation in the days following, maybe even the weeks following, where the dust has settled. They realize that, Joe Smith's not getting out of custody, and they actually may be able to escape this environment. But again, I can't stress enough the value or the importance of having that initial contact on scene, because that's going to be such critical information. And I feel like some guys and gals, cop wise, either don't want to dive into it because they know it's going to create more work, or they don't want to dive into it because they don't feel confident in their ability to interview someone like that. And for that group of individuals or those people, the stuff that you've talked about, I think, can really sort of impact their skill set and knowledge. Kind of going back to what you guys teach, is that part of the curriculum? Is there a kind of a baseline that starts for the classes you guys offer? I know that where I come from, they're really pushing the science-based stuff, and I think you hit the nail on the head financially, that if you use that word, it's going to automatically draw them over. It's true. But is that to say that Batty or some of the other I&I courses are now going to be obsolete in the future?
Well, so I've heard, for example, that even the Reed Institute is moving away from some of their stuff, and I think people are going to adapt. I mean, it's like anything in business; you adapt or die. And there's a few science-based things that uh, that are good.
Sure.
Like for example, strategic use of evidence is something that everybody should be using.
Absolutely.
And that was developed by Dr. Maria Hartwig and Par Anders Granhag, and I forget the names of all the other. There's 2 or 3 other PhDs on it. Really useful, and everybody should be using it.
Yeah.
But and that's absolutely science based. Rapport based is absolutely science based. Cognitive interviewing is something we could get into.
I don't want people to think that we're trashing science-based. The problem that I have with science-based is when I'm being told, and I think you might share this opinion, is that it's the way. And there's multiple ways, I think. And when you develop a skill set that really dives into interview and interrogation, there's no one way to interview someone. And
Right.
I could say the same thing about any of the other courses I've taken, where just because he yawns and looks to the right doesn't mean that he did it. It means that he's been awake for 2 days and he's probably tired. So there's things that I think you can utilize. And my takeaway from using science-based for a couple of years now is I like the way I sound. When I listen to audio and video back, thinking about jury appeal and being the IO, going to court, I sound genuine. I sound like I'm trying to find the truth rather than I'm trying to find guilt or blame. And it really helped me understand that the way you say things, how you say them is a big deal. Minimization, stuff like that, where, we all could say, we've all gone to court, I don't know, 2-3 years down the road, and you listen to your audio and you go, God, I sound terrible. That sounds bad. But you learn as you go. And I really can't stress how adaptive this topic is in terms of your career, how you will go maybe 6 months and you'll do something totally different because of one thing you took away from one interview. But on that note, yeah, I'm not saying that science-based is not good. It's a way. I don't like how it's being, until you're like really in it. I feel like, and it depends on who you have at the table with you. Sometimes we'll bring the DA over for a big investigation. We'll have multiple seats at the table with different opinions. And right now I feel like some of the DAs are really pushing the science-based stuff, so much so to where it almost makes you sound unnatural if you're not really familiar with it. So yeah, I mean, that's kind of not a disclaimer I'm throwing out, but I'm of the mindset that it's a tool, and I understand that we're moving forward in that direction, but we still can't, get away from some of the baseline interview tactics that have been tried and true for decades because they work.
Yeah, I think some stuff's kind of instinctive too, and
Sure.
yeah, my whole thing with interview and interrogation, whatever the thing is, that if I did something wrong, okay, you're saying you don't like my interview or whatever, then you need to point to what it is that I did wrong, and you need to point to how I should have known that it was wrong. And there's a few poison pills in interview that you can't do, or else it's getting suppressed immediately.
Sure.
But if for example, I had a defense attorney one time tell me, well, that was a really long interview. And I responded saying, well, you didn't mind it when you were a prosecuting attorney, but we can get into it,
Yeah.
I've been in trial on the stand, literally citing that Innocence Project study of saying, well, the average is 16 hours leading to a false confession. So this is what, 3, 4. So I guess let's not worry about it, and it's just one of those things where it's like, I think that the only thing I don't want to see with the science-based stuff is to overcorrect to the point that we throw the baby out with the bathwater. Okay. There's good stuff and common sense approaches that don't have to be, well, you didn't use every single step of the cognitive interview or whatever. So yeah, I also want to go back to something you were talking about with the patrol officers. I think especially once you get some experience, I forget how long you said you were a police officer, but it's always easy to look back on the newer, officers and be like, look at these guys. They're not, doing X, Y, and Z. And my big thing is I really want to encourage everybody to want to interview. Interview is a really exciting aspect. It makes your cases so much stronger. You learn so much more. Like, you write these much more thorough reports, and if you care about the crime that you're investigating, sometimes you don't. Like, sometimes it's, I don't want to name the crimes, but like a trespassing, for example.
Sure.
Like, I mean, you got to clear it out. It's a nuisance thing, but like, yeah, I don't need you to interview that guy. But like, a guy who's beating his wife or sexually assaulting children or doing what, like, you ought to care about that.
Yeah.
And I don't want to overburden those people with thinking. My whole thing is that interview is not a mystical thing. Okay. Like, you just work the fundamentals, which is have some sort of a plan. Go slow, ask your questions. There's a few questioning techniques, asking one question at a time, using your notes effectively, keeping your emotions out of it, keeping that rapport, doing those things. So my thing for patrol is that a lot of patrol, because of that high call volume, is, when we have to work backfill because we don't have enough officers, and so we'll go back and work backfill. And when I do, I'm always glad to kind of work with newer officers, because I'll say, look, like, work this case. I know there's 10 other cases, but unless one of our people, is getting hurt, then it can wait. Okay. Like, it can wait for a minute, and you should work if they wanted you to do the job right, they'd give you the time and the resources to do it. And until then you got to choose, right? Do you want to work everything terribly or work a few things really well? And I think if you just, I'm not asking people to spend an hour talking to these street suspect interviews, but if you take it from 2 minutes to like 7 minutes, it's just a little extra time and you'll be surprised. I have a guy that I mentor who sends me text messages like once a week, and he'll be like, "Hey man, check out this interview. I asked this guy, did the thing you said, and he just told me all these things." And
Yeah.
it's not that much more work
Mhm.
for a much higher quality product. And, you'll have a lot of pride in it too when you walk away. So my whole thing is a lot of patrol interviews kind of end up, because of the fast nature, end up being fast food and super quick. It kind of fills you up, but it's really not that great. Uh, and I'm not asking people to do date night restaurant level stuff. We're looking for Chipotle, like a fast
Yeah.
casual, like pretty good, pretty healthy. And that's where a few interview techniques that has you listening to people and building rapport and just taking a little extra time. If you take even 5 extra minutes, you can go a lot farther than you think you can.
Yeah. No, I think that's great advice, and I think it's agency dependent, and then I always remind people too, is especially with DV stuff, you may go to that same call 5, 6, 7, 8 times. Don't write it off as, oh, here we go again. This might be the one time where this person makes the decision. And DV is a hard one because it's consistent and it happens all the time, and repetition can create sort of that mental fatigue where they just don't want to do it, coupled with sergeants who are also watching the board, clear calls, do this, do that. I mean, I think what you're suggesting is totally doable and it's reasonable, especially when it comes to the prosecution side of the house, where we all know at minimum what's the one thing we need. Well, were they interviewed? If the answer is no, well then we have work to do. And even if they lawyer up, that's still an attempt. So changing gears and going to kind of the other side, and I do want to talk about the book, uh, mainly because I don't think there's enough good info out there for uh, any level of cop. I mean, I'm a big advocate of furthering education, and I think that when you think you know everything, you failed. It should be a constant drive to learn and to move forward. Um, for anyone who hasn't done it, writing a book is extremely challenging. It's not easy, and it's one of those things that takes a lot of dedication. So I do want to talk about that. I know it's not published yet, but it will be.
Well, I've got a manuscript, and I have. I mean, I can be impatient sometimes, and so some of the early kind of responses that I've had are, there's a 6 to 8 month process of like, I don't know. At a certain point, I'll just self-publish it,
Mhm.
But yeah, it took a lot of work. The one thing that I did is I started a blog on interview and interrogation. I think you said you had a blog too, and
Mhm.
and after you do that for a couple of years, you have a pretty big body of work.
Yeah.
And your ideas evolve some over time, but so that was, I think, if I just had to start from zero, like 0 words on page and write it, I don't know if I ever would have gotten it, but yeah, it's about 200 pages, and I think it's good. I've had it out to other practitioners and family members. I have a sister-in-law that's a lawyer, and she's like a very critical editor. My wife's a strong editor. And I send it to them, and they look over it, and they, it's positive, and it's interesting because it's very specific to police interviewing of suspects. Um, so it's all the stuff that we talk about. It's demystifying the interview process to the point of even looking into aspects that people don't think about. For example, contacting the suspect. I found out just through working with other detectives that there's a lot of really bad ways to do this. and so I had a guy that I met up and I hadn't seen in a couple of years, and during the 2020 riots, We met up, and I was like, "Hey, how you been?" And he said, "Oh yeah, I'm good. I'm a detective now over in sex abuse." And then he I asked if he had any interviews, and he said, "Yeah, there's this one guy I've really been trying to interview, but he hasn't come in." He said, "Take a look." And I looked at his messages, and his messages were something like, uh, "Sir, I need to interview you. This is Detective so and so. I need to interview you about this case." And the guy goes, "Okay, what's it about?" He said, "Well, we'll talk about it when you get in." He goes,
Yeah.
"Okay, but what's it about?" And he goes, "Sir, if you don't come in, it's going to be considered an act of noncompliance and could result in." I was like, "Oh my God, no wonder he
Yeah.
hasn't come in." So,
I wouldn't come
uh,
in either. Like,
yeah, I wouldn't come in
no,
either. I
no.
mean,
Yeah.
you might commit all sorts of felonies, but maybe not that one. And I might
Yeah.
come in and talk to you if you'd say what it is. So it seems like a very small thing where you're like, oh, it's just talking to people and making an appointment. So anybody can do that. But, common misconception, like I referenced earlier, is this I'm going to surprise the guy when they get in, and then I'll really get that, oh crap moment, and their eyes fling up. And it's just not that way. If they did it, they
No.
know they did it. And so the way that I learned to do it is actually from my first dental exam I had in Austin. I learned a lot from this, and I'll tell you what I mean by that. So I walked in, and I got checked up, and on the way out, the lady said, "Hey, get out your calendar." So I pulled out my phone, just not thinking. She goes, "It was like December." She goes, "July 25th. What are you doing?" And I said, "Well, I look, I see nothing." She goes, "Okay,
Yeah.
go ahead and put it down 1 p.m. I'll see you then for your checkup." And before I knew it, I was scheduled for a checkup when I was like, I was going to put it off like I usually do
Yeah.
and come
Yeah.
in when I needed it. And so anyway, so one of the things that we teach people on this contacting of the suspect is call the person, identify yourself and the issue at hand, which is, hey, look, I'm investigating. Uh, your niece is saying that there was some inappropriate touching, is what I might say instead of saying she's accusing you of rape, maybe.
Sure.
But we're on topic, right?
Yeah.
So um, it'll be shocking to you how often people are like, well, I don't know why she would say that. Sure, yeah, we ought to clear that up, as opposed to that didn't happen.
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
So anyway, so identify the issue, and then it's like a sales pitch. You just say, hey, look, I'd like to talk to you about it. I haven't made any final decisions. Look, I'm available this Friday at 9 a.m. or next Tuesday at 1 p.m. Which can I put you down for? Friday? Just like that. And you just sell it, and the person's like, yeah, I'll see you Friday. And then that's it,
Yeah.
and then you follow up with a text message, and you make sure you stay in touch with them. And it seems so simple, but like that, I think people write books over really eye-opening things. It's all
Sure.
that nonverbal stuff, the asymmetrical
Yeah.
shoulder shrugs and face
Yeah.
wiping.
Yeah.
But nobody writes about the fundamentals, these basic things that you need to think about, whether it's from the setup of a room, how to think about a two detective interview, which are often done terribly. And if you choose to do a two detective interview, how should you approach it? And so yes, I think my book will have an avenue to be interesting for people because it focuses on fundamentals, and it. I think there's a lot of questions that people have that they're like almost embarrassed to ask.
Oh, for
It's
sure.
like,
That's most
yeah,
cops. Most cops don't want to say I don't know or I've
yeah,
never done that before, and that's no, it's not to embarrass the person, but you don't know until you do it. And I think what you're talking about is spot on. I think there's enough books out there. If we were to compare it to I don't know, food, where they're trying to teach you how to make osobuco, and we just want to make some chicken and rice. That's going to feed you,
yep.
and
Chicken rice
it's
will feed you.
simple. And that's stuff that you could do in the box. That's stuff you could do on the road. I mean, that really is, yeah. And you're not lying to them. Again, going back to the minimization and deception stuff, telling someone I don't know yet, and I don't have all. That's not lying. It's the truth. I don't know what my decision is going to be because I haven't spoken to you yet. I have no idea. Am I going to jail? That's a very common question that I would say most patrol guys sort of stop and go, I don't know. That's the
Yeah.
answer. I don't know, man. I got a lot more work to do. I have more questions to ask. Is it possible? Sure. Is it possible that you might not? Sure. That's awesome. So,
But I would say on that too is like if you know they're going to jail, you should tell them they're going to
Oh
jail.
yeah, be
It's like
honest,
a,
100%. Yeah.
like, so in my custodial interrogations, what I'll usually say is, I do a good greeting. I shake their hand. I say, hey, I'm Darrel Lambert. I'm a senior detective here, and I want to sit down and talk with you. And I want you to understand that you are under arrest right now. Okay. And the reason is that my bosses, I got to a point in my investigation, and my bosses are always looking over my shoulder. And they looked at this case and they said, why is this guy not under arrest? And I said, look, I'm still investigating. But they said, look, is it probable? And I said, yeah, it's probable. And so you're here because it reached a point in an investigation. It was probable that you were involved. But here's the deal: probable isn't certain. And so if you have anything to say that can show that you didn't have to do with it, you've got to go to jail tonight, okay? But I will go to my bosses and I'll make sure they know everything that you say. If you have leads that I can follow up on, I'm gonna follow up on those. Um, and you're going to be treated with respect, and I'm going to show you the evidence. We'll look at the evidence together of what indicated, and if I'm looking at it wrong, you just tell me, okay? And you go through that process where as opposed to, oh well, I'm not really sure if you're going to jail. Like, bro, you got brought in handcuffs by
Yeah.
men in plate carriers, like you're going to jail.
Or if they had a warrant there, I mean, just say, yeah, you have a
Yeah.
warrant for your arrest. There will be a booking process. And like you use the word probable, for people who don't know, it is a probable cause arrest. This does not mean that you're guilty. We still have to go through the court process. And after they calm down and realize this is their opportunity, I mean, most of the time they will talk to you. In my findings, I would say for your sex assault people, anything involving kids, it's only a matter of time before they start to talk, because a lot of the times they're going to try to minimize themselves, or a variety of other roads they can go down. But yeah, I would say the people that you think aren't going to talk, they're usually the ones who end up talking to you the most. What would you recommend for, I mean, I guess you have, we're still on kind of the newer guy topic-ish, but if they're dealing with someone who's just, this is their life, they're a career criminal, the strong silent type who knows, I mean, that's where I feel like a lot of guys get hinked up. They feel like they won't be able to, and it becomes this strange sort of like I don't know, we're trying to gauge each other, and this guy's been around the block, and you have this 22-year-old kid who doesn't have a lot of life experience or confidence, but they're talking to someone who's in their 40s, who's lived a life of very violent crime, and they think they don't have a chance talking to this person. What would you say to that individual who's trying to bridge a gap between the two?
So, one, reduce, try not to prophesy what you think is going to happen. Don't, because it'll be self-fulfilling. And so a lot of people think, oh, this guy's a hardened gang member. He's an insane gangster crip. He's got tattoos all over his face. There's zero chance he's going to talk to me. And that's not necessarily true at all. I would say no matter how hardened that person is, now you may have some exceptions. I don't work in LA with some of that gang culture there. I mean, I think those guys might, maybe, I don't know, but if you go in anticipating they're not going to talk to you, then they won't talk to you. Okay. So you approach them with respect, and whatever it is, whether they're having sex with children or they're murdering people in drive-bys, whatever it is, whatever the thing is, you approach them with respect, and you let them know that you're going to listen to them. And I cannot tell you how many times I've talked to detectives in the hallway getting ready to go in, and they're going to say, this guy is a serial pedophile. He's not going to talk to me. This guy is a grade A, gangster. Like, he's not going to talk to me. And then they do, and then they do, because, people are curious. They have hope. They want to know if they can talk themselves out of it. Just because they are criminals doesn't mean that they're good criminals.
Mm-hmm.
There's so that's a common one where people will anticipate that it won't talk. They won't talk, and another one is when they have a lawyer. So they'll say, this guy's got a lawyer, he's not going to say anything. That's not necessarily true. I've had defense attorneys help me interrogate their clients. I had one guy who he told me he had he told me about a threesome relationship that he had with his girlfriend and some other girl, and at some point I thought to myself, I said, how old was she? And he goes, well, I don't really know. And his attorney turned to him and he goes, now Seth, That's not what you told. Now tell the detective what you told me. And he was like, she was 16, and it's like, I mean, you think that, they've got a lawyer. That means they're not saying anything. And that's not
Yeah.
necessarily true. I mean, some lawyers really, some defense lawyers will really, interfere and obstruct and get in the way and that stuff. Some of them will help you. I mean, some aren't really criminal defense lawyers. They're a property tax lawyer that
Yeah.
got roped
Yeah.
in to come in with the guy. So,
Exactly.
um, so yeah, number one is don't anticipate. Just try to prepare for the case as though they're going to talk, because I've seen people go in and say, this guy's not going to say anything. I'm just got to go give it a try. And then he talks and they don't have a good plan because they didn't strategize or come up with questions or anything. And now they don't have anything to say. So I forget what
Yeah.
the exact question was, but something about
Yeah.
how, what was it? So,
Basically what a new guy could do to prepare to go against someone who's they would just go in anticipating that this is probably going to go nowhere because they know more than me. And that's I think a sustained fear until you do it in repetition, which is why I encourage people to, talk to people, not just in interrogation settings, talk to people on the road in any capacity. And I have the gift of gab. I've had it since I was a kid. It's just me. But if you can communicate with anyone, anywhere, especially your quote unquote bad guys in your beat, that's huge. And that will 9 times out of 10, and I'm not talking about just like, striking up conversation, like actually talk to some of these people, because eventually they're going to be an asset to you. They may be a suspect for you, and all of that, you want to call it pregame verbiage that you've had with that relationship over the years will make a difference. I can't speak highly enough about just having a positive contact with people even after you've arrested them. In my findings, depending on the area you work, you're going to run into the same people over and over and over again, and they will remember the people who they had a positive experience with. And I'm not talking about kissing their ass. I'm talking about the things that you're talking about, being human during the interview and giving that social connection to where, even if you're the bad guy in their eyes, you still gave them the respect that they deserve. Because I think as humans, we can, even if you're talking to someone who is a just evil person, for the judicial process, it needs to be unbiased. It needs to be just a conversation, an interview, again, to find the truth, not blame, not guilt, but tell me exactly what happened.
yeah, and I would say too, like a common mistake of younger officers, because I don't know, 22, 23 when I started too. So, I mean, my very first call, I swear to God, my first call out of the academy was a leaving the scene of a collision call where I showed up on scene and I was looking awesome. My boots were shine, my uniform looked great. First call, I showed up and the guy looks at me and he goes, "You're a rookie, aren't you?" And I was like, "Oh God." And so I think what the response that a lot of guys will do is that they try to act harder or more
Yep.
streetwise or
Oh yeah.
different than they are. And that doesn't play well. You should just be who you
No.
are. And like if you're 20, I mean, it's hard to have humility at 22, but if you can, if you can have a little bit of humility and say, "Hey, look, like, I'm just a new cop, but I am curious about what you're saying." If you can
Yeah.
be curious without trying to overplay the thing. And I saw this with like undercover guys too, is that guys would always try to, they would overplay the part, and like the way you buy drugs is you just buy drugs because everybody buys drugs. And if you try to act in a way that's inconsistent with who you are
Yeah.
as the way you talk, they're going to see through it. So be the way you are and be curious, have a little humility, like you get rid of the tough guy thing. Like
Oh
there's
yeah.
a lot to be said about like, I'm just a bumbling new guy and I'm trying to figure it out. And, a lot of times people will talk more to you.
Yeah. Kind of like a modified Columbo,
That's right.
stuff like that.
Yeah.
But so one of the things that really caught my attention when I was reading your bio and the blog stuff too, but I feel like so I've been in sex assault, child abuse for about a year and a half now, and the things that I've just sort of seen in terms of, and I have kids myself. Do you have children?
Yes.
So this new, I guess if I had to put it into a sentence, your my kids aren't dangerous playing out front. The most danger that they're going to interact with throughout their day is in a probably 6 by 3 inch piece of plastic and metal that's in their pocket. And the digital world is just so unbelievably terrifying to me. And I'm a good parent in the proactive, just, I'm not paranoid. I have good kids, but um, the classes I've gone to, the debriefs, the seminars, for the average person, and you and I are not average in the sense of parental control. I feel like we get a very unique and sort of terrifying perspective into what the world offers right now. But I feel like the average parent within the U.S. doesn't really understand the totality that comes with the digital world, and specifically when it comes to the child abuse stuff. I know that's a passion of yours, and that's kind of a multi-stage, I guess, question. But if there was, I guess, one thing that you had to pick right now for the average, teenager in America, aside from obviously some of the drug stuff, which is, an issue, but more so the digital world. We can even dive into self-harm, stuff like that. I personally have worked quite a few cases, one in particular where just the level of dependency, more of a chemical dependency on the cell phone, on social media. What is one of the, I guess, the biggest things that parents should be worried about in terms of their children's safety, whether it's physical or digital these days?
Well, the danger can come from anywhere, and I don't want to make people paranoid,
Sure.
but for example, the vast majority of people that will sexually abuse a child are family members or known. So,
Yeah.
and it's not confined to just stepdads. It's bio dads, it's uncles, it's dad's friend, it's mom's new boyfriend, whatever. And so. Um, so it's hard. I would say, and I know this is kind of shifting the question a little bit, but to the number, in my opinion, the number one thing you can do to make your kids safe is to teach them right from wrong and teach them a certain amount of resilience and observational skills, like when it comes to these things. So, for example. Your kids should know what their body parts are. I recommend against using, uh, hoo or whatever instead of vagina. If it's a vagina, it's a vagina. If it's a penis, it's a penis. I think that covering, starting like that, and using real words. I've worked cases before with even teenagers who they don't know if it was their anus or their vagina. They don't know the difference. They don't seem to know it's different parts. Um, so recommend, like, letting that, like, what are the parts that are involved, making them aware that they should not be alone um, with adults. They you know obviously parents and stuff that are
Sure.
safe,
Yeah.
that are,
Yeah.
whatever. They should never keep secrets for adults. That is super inappropriate. Any sort of adult that they'll usually kind of test the water to see if they can get the kid to keep a secret or whatever. They don't need to keep secrets for adults. Adults don't need help from children. And so that's always going to be an issue. If you get a guy looking for his lost dog and be like, "Hey, little kid, can you help me look for my lost dog?" Like, no, you're an adult, and this is
Yeah.
an 8-year-old. Like, they don't need your help. Um, and so, just like some basic things of letting them know, like we talk to my kids early about, like, making sure to not take rides from people they're not expecting to pick them up. And it starts with strangers, but it even, it moved into, of course, I trust my family members, and I have no reason not to, but I'll even tell my kids, I said, like, if a family member that you're not expecting to pick you up, like, you should ask questions as to what's going on instead of just, like, jumping in the car. And I know that's a hard conversation to have, but as a parent, you cannot have your hand on that kid's head 24/7, 365. Okay. There's going to be times they go to school, somebody else watches them, you've got to work, whatever it is. Your kid is always the person that's going to be there. And so it's training your kids of how to protect themselves, knowing that they can talk to adults and who are safe people and how to get safe is it's hard, and it sucks because I especially because of the line of work that I'm in, I started talking about tough conversations really young with my kids, even at like probably 5 years old, 6 years old, and it starts simple, but but having that conversation and making sure that they know. That no adults need to see their private parts. No adults need to have them keep secrets. Even early, and my kids are still pretty young, but like I've told them in terms of digital stuff, never take a picture of yourself with your clothes off is rule one. Rule two is if you do take a picture with your clothes off, which you've broken rule one, but let's say you do, never send it to anybody. And rule
Mhm.
three is if you violated rule one and two, come and tell us immediately, because one of the things we're seeing with suicidality and stuff with kids, is that they're then getting blackmailed. They get
Yeah.
enticed into sending pictures to a boyfriend, or sometimes they're random chat people that
Yeah.
are in other countries that are getting them to send pictures,
Yeah.
and then they're blackmailing them to the point that they feel suicidal. So, yeah, those are kind of my initial thoughts on keeping your kids safe.
Yeah. There was a case. I want to say it was. I don't want to get the state wrong, but this kid, he was a really good kid, normal, really involved in school, and during the course of one evening, it started as a fake conversation with a gentleman posing as a female. I think there was some nudes exchanged and the money demanded. By about 5 a.m., he had hung himself outside the bedroom window. And the mom actually came and spoke. It was at the California Sex Assault Conference last year. And literally within, I think it was like 6 hours, it escalated from this to that. And I don't think that, and this was a scenario where the family said, like, there's just no way we saw this coming. And you touched on it in the beginning. We're not trying to make people paranoid, but after working child abuse, I was shocked at how many of my caseload was bio dad or something family related. And it's not to say that everyone's a suspect, but if you see red flags as a parent, I think that if you're involved and just a responsible parent to some degree, that if you have that spidey sense or just something doesn't feel right, it's because something's not right. And it may not be something super egregious. It may even be a misunderstanding, which we all know can happen. But I think that that concept of having open communication from a very young age is super important. But it's just weird. And I'm, you know, I know we're all guilty of it, but I feel like there's just so much of an emphasis on the phone thing, whether it's social. I mean, it's all social, but the juvenile dependency has reached a level to where I think we're seeing the new predator prey aspect in the digital world becoming something. I mean, all the ICAT cases and stuff that we have coming in, we just pretty much pick the worst ones possible because there's so many that are out there.
Right.
Internet crimes against children is the acronym, but digitally, um, we're seeing the grooming. And for those who don't know, grooming is essentially the process in which the perpetrator will start to befriend, however, by any means necessary. You talked about the help aspect. That's a huge one where, hey, I need help with this or just random stuff. And the secret is huge. And just to kind of go back to that, so people really understand, the secret thing is important because the predator is going to tell them something in secret, right? They're going to get that confidence and the connection there. And that's how they know. And they're oftentimes going to look for children who are going to be, sort of attracted to that. And that usually comes back to, in my opinion, I don't want to say bad parenting, but a lack of involvement because the kid's not going to tell their parents. So that's a communication issue to begin with that could be resolved fairly easily if we were, we don't have to be helicopter parents, but we do need to be, I don't know, a drone, a U-2 spy plane, something that's just there. We're not going to be hovering, but we should be aware of the baseline socially in our kids' lives. And my oldest didn't get a cell phone till he was 13, and the guy at the AT&T store was shocked. He was like, "Wow, that's great." And I asked him, I said, "Well, what's kind of the average age?" He told me between 8 and 10 is when
Yeah.
most kids are getting an iPhone these days. So,
Yeah, there's another thing you can do as a parent too, that instead of asking your kid, did you have a good day at school? ask them, how was your day at school, right? And so it's removing the necessity for them to respond in like a positive way, right?
Hmm.
And you can kind of just listen, right? Just listen to what they say, and they'll talk to you about problems, or if they'll talk, of course, sometimes my my son is like, good.
Yeah.
And it's
What'd you
like,
learn
okay,
about?
it's
Nothing. Oh, great. Nothing.
nothing.
Fantastic. Yeah.
Amazing, yeah.
Yeah.
Um, but uh, but yeah, so removing that sort of aspect of guiding the conversation, and then occasionally ask them, like, did anything not so good happen today?
Hmm.
After they've answered and responded. The And then I'll make a plug too, that if you ever find out that so the vast majority of the cases that I work in child abuse are sex abuse. And the vast majority of those are delayed outcries, which means
Oh,
that they
yeah.
don't say for sometimes years. Okay,
Oh,
like
yeah.
I would say, if I had to guess, the average number of years about 5.
Yeah. I agree.
So you're
Yeah.
saying this thing happened 5 years ago. Such and such touched me, and this is what happened, right? And it's really confusing for parents at first, because they're like, well, why wouldn't they just tell me? And suspects will, part of that grooming process is that they will, sometimes it can be soft grooming. So it can be treats or alcohol or phone time or screen time, or, one guy abused, bought the kids silence with Roblox
No.
toys. I
Yeah.
don't even know how that works, but like, here's a
Yeah.
pet on Roblox or something. Um, and so it can be a little bit of so that's like a soft grooming, and then there's like a harder grooming that's threatening, right? So if you tell me I'm going to leave, and your mom's not going to be able to pay for rent, do you want to
Yeah.
do that? Or of course, actual physical violence can be threatened too. But yeah, so if your kid tells you something, listen, and try not to press them for every single detail. Just hear, what they say, and then report it. And I'll say too, another thing that people get hung up on is that a lot of times when kids make their first outcry, it's when they're in trouble.
Hmm.
So you're yelling at them to pick up the room. I told you to pick up the room. Why didn't you pick up the room? And dad's been touching me. And some parents have a lot of hesitation over that, because they're like, oh, they're just trying to get out of trouble.
Yeah.
That can't possibly be true. I don't know. I mean, if kids don't, unless your kid is a habitual liar and they lie about everything, the vast majority, there's a guy named Larry Bronstein who teaches, he's a family attorney up in New York, but he teaches at different conferences. And he cites a study that says that it's something like the rate of false confession for prepubescent children is like 6 or something. Like I say false confession, but like a false accusation.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, it goes a little bit higher if you're in the middle of a custody dispute,
Oh, for sure.
something like that, but not as high as you would think. It might go to 10.
Hmm.
But even then, you're talking, a 95% chance that kid's telling you the truth.
Yeah.
And with teenagers, it's a little bit higher, just the nature of it. But even that doesn't go past maybe 15%. So very few people, kiddos, are lying about this stuff.
Yeah. It's interesting how similar, even you being, geographically so far away, how everything stays very consistent with how things are brought up. And I've had a lot of cases that during an active argument, because of, let's say they got caught smoking weed, they talk about a rape that happened 2 years ago. And
Mm-hmm.
most of the parents, once the dust is settled and everything's working out, they say, man, I wish I knew, because it explained all the behavior. It explained XYZ.
Yeah.
And most of the kids, I'm calling them kids, but teenagers, it's a combination of a lot of things. It could be shame. It could be guilt. It could be, some of those scenarios, especially dealing with girls, it's a scenario that they got themselves into. But that's one of the things that we'll usually talk about before we do any type of interview about what non-consensual is. And non-consensual is very simple. You could be having sex with someone for 30 minutes. If at any point during that time you decide you don't want to and say no, that's now non-consensual sex. And um, I also think that there's an interesting, we're seeing an uptick in reports, because I feel like there's and maybe it's a school thing, or it could be a social thing, but you know, I didn't want to after the fact, or we had sex and then I realized I didn't want to after. Those can be challenging, because I feel like there's a different expectation. This is just geographically for me, where It's almost like I regretted it after the fact, but I didn't say anything. And then victim management after that point, it can be a sort of a challenging thing for them to look at. And then of course law enforcement usually takes the brunt of the weight for the blame, which can be frustrating. And then that in turn can lead to things that don't get reported down the road. So victim management, I think, is a big part of it. And kind of going back to the things you were touching on earlier, I think that there's just so much that we can say, or so much that should be said about just the initial contact with someone. The first 30 seconds of any contact with anybody, especially a victim, will probably make or break their collaboration with you moving forward in terms of what they're willing to disclose or not disclose. In Texas, do you guys utilize the MDI process for certain victims?
Yeah, so we use forensic interviews for 17 and under. And then I'm not sure what we call it, MDS, multidisciplinary staffing usually, but that's where you're
Okay.
bringing in the doctors and therapists and all that stuff.
Yeah, same thing. Yeah.
Yeah, so unless it's an adult child, which would start at 18, I rarely have any sort of direct contact with the victims.
Yeah, same.
It might be like passing them in the hallway or something, but
Sure.
not talking with them at all.
Go ahead.
Yeah, it's a tough subject, and I think that it's been really weird just on the political aspect of sort of watching it get picked up as a sort of political football, where I have aspects that I disagree with from both the left and the right, where I feel like when the right kind of picked up the human trafficking, child trafficking football, and the left was like, no, that's not happening, and it's like, well,
Yeah.
okay, it is.
Yeah.
And then on the right, something that I observed is it was a couple of years ago. I guess it had come up that when the Roe v. Wade was getting overturned, and the commentators on the right were like, oh well, like, rape of 12-year-olds and incest rapes of 12-year-olds are not happening. And that was being said at the exact time that I had an 11-year-old in Colorado getting an abortion, and I was organizing having those fetal remains mailed back to me in Texas for the investigation. And so,
Yeah.
it's I don't think it should be political. People should not hurt children, and we should all agree on that. And we should investigate it as fully as possible and make sure everybody has the funding and staffing and support to do that. And anything else is wrong. So.
Yeah. For those who don't know, and that probably caught their attention, the importance of recovering fetal remains for the case involving DNA, that's kind of a nitty gritty, but it's true. I mean, there's so much that I don't think people know that goes into the process of what it takes to investigate some of those things. And I agree that it is sad. During the whole Me Too movement, I don't like saying believe all women. I like saying believe all victims. Well, yeah, we should take a proactive approach. If this person's willing to come forward and talk about something, then we have every reason to hear their story and to listen. And then it's up to the judicial process to ultimately decide. But I agree. I think it's very strange that we're politicizing certain things that shouldn't hold any. I mean, it's not political. It's social, and it's the criminal justice system. And it is interesting as we kind of move through this political minefield over the years about how certain things become speaking points and then they go away. And then, yeah, that is it's weird. I don't know why we do that as a nation, but it seems to be a reoccurring issue every 4 years or so.
Yeah, and I don't know why. I think maybe because the right was the whole. I don't even want to bring it up on a podcast,
Sure.
but like there's like these pedo rings or whatever, and it became like kind of a conspiracy theory. And then
what's the movie they made? That movie got a lot of attention.
Sound of Freedom, right? Or no? Was it Sound of Freedom?
Sound of Freedom, Cry Freedom. I'm gonna mess it up. Sound of Freedom. I'm pretty sure. I never saw it.
Yeah.
But what was funny is a lot of I have my friend pool's pretty. I got friends on the right and the left, but all my right friends were like, "Oh, it's incredible." All my left, it's fake. That's not real. And it's like, well, I mean, I'm not going to say it's 100% real, but it's 100% that stuff happens for sure. Maybe not in your backyard, but I assure you, in the U.S. and outside the U.S., oh yeah, that's a big deal. That is a huge animal to try and tackle. If you had to do it, it would require multiple entities internationally. But
Yeah, well, and I didn't see the movie either, but
I
just
didn't
because it
see
was
it.
so
No.
politicized, and
Yeah,
I know what I know, and I know that human trafficking and child sexual abuse and all these things are very real and very active, and you know, I don't. I think it's silly if you're reflexively denying something because one political party kind of makes it an issue. And it's like, well,
sure.
no, it's not an issue. Like, well, let's think about it. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like maybe there's some issues that we could all just have a consensus on, which
yeah.
is, you shouldn't rape children or traffic human beings
I
of any sort.
Yeah, I think that's a good thing. Yeah. I think people though they get caught up in sort of the movie aspect where, I mean, are there children that are being flown all up? Sure. But trafficking, I think for most cops is going to be kind of your baseline, mostly prostitution or girls who are sort of groomed initially and then brought into that world. The digital portion of that is extremely challenging to navigate. In California, I mean, some of the larger cities, LA, the Bay Area, there are tons of girls who are trafficked, and most of it is through prostitution, but mostly online. So, kind of your back page, I don't think is a thing anymore for us. It's gone now, but
Right.
there's a multitude of websites you could utilize, which is just crazy to me because we did some UC work last year, and just the openness of it. People were openly leaving reviews, like they had ratings and stars and commentary. It's just like, is it
Right.
a restaurant or is this a prostitute? It was very scary.
Right.
Um, and just the sheer number. There's a guy that I work with who spent time in the Bay Area doing that full time, and he said the numbers were just staggering, and he had no idea until he was doing it. So,
Yeah, and another thing that's really concerning, I have a partner of mine who's working a case right now where he found a guy who was shipping sex toys to Europe or to a specific person. It's very like I have no idea how this guy got to that point, but he pulled his Snapchat and there are these girls that are 15, 16, whatever, that are actively marketing themselves, and maybe that's maybe they're being trafficked, like maybe they have a John that's running the whole thing or whatever. But that's really scary too, like because then you have this whole kind of development of like OnlyFans is like,
yeah,
or whatever this process is. But kids are seeing that. I mean, I open Twitter and they'll be like, oh, this person made $48 million
yeah,
in a year, and you're like, it's I don't know. As just I try not to be the moral police, but if I could make a
it's
recommendation,
oh
don't
yeah,
support any of that ever, whether
no,
it's adults or definitely not
it's
children.
I see a lot of girls sort of pre-planning. There's a case that I have from a year ago that it hasn't gone to trial yet, but the mindset for, I would say, I don't want to say the majority, but a lot of specifically girls, is that they just sort of have this kind of like, well, I don't really know what I want to do, but in the meantime, I can make money doing OnlyFans, whatever it is. And it doesn't necessarily even have to be full nude, but the more common theme that I see with some of these girls is that they'll, as soon as they turn 18, because OnlyFans is pretty good about that, and I respect them for having a very vetting process, which there are some places that don't. So in that regard, I'm happy for that. But um, this sort of strange, it's become normalized. And again, I'm on the same page as you are. I don't want to sound like moral PD pullover, but there needs to be a line drawn somewhere where we say this isn't normal, like this isn't okay. And eventually when you're older, you're not going to like that you have pictures and videos of you having sex that are still out there. And it's very hard. The toothpaste theory is what I tell a lot of girls that are approaching that age in some of these investigations. We have a lot of them that come through, especially the ICAC stuff, where they like the attention because it makes them feel good. And I don't care if you're a boy or a girl, in this day and age, there is an extreme validation through social media. You get to be cool, you get to be popular, you get the dopamine, you get all these things that make you feel good. And for you and I think we're similar in age. That was a very different scenario in high school. Social status was not based on a phone. It was based on you. It was based on school. It was based on clothing, whatever was cool at the time. But now we have this very fast and quick delivery for that social interaction. which they see, okay, this makes me popular. I can do this, I can do that. And very quickly, you mentioned Roblox earlier. My God, I have so many cases that come through that alone. Mega, another
Right.
huge platform, like, and then it happens so quickly. And going back to that toothpaste concept, it's so easy to squeeze, but putting that back in is impossible sometimes. And for every 500 images that you put out there, 150 of those are going to go somewhere where you'll never be able to take them down. And if you create enough of a presence for yourself, there were a couple cases, one locally where I live, where this girl, actually years down the road, got recognized at a supermarket. And it was just this crazy, after she thought it was over and it was done. No, it's still out there. And the fix, I don't know. I mean, you can be as good of a parent as you want. I've had tons of cases where these girls in particular were just normal. And then, I hate using that word, but a normal family, normal childhood. And then something happened within a few months and they became this social media influencer, which is interesting because I personally really have taken a deep dive into some of the things that we've seen basically in terms of sex crimes and what people are looking for. The days of pornography being, I guess, like, how do I say this? The average porn star, this Jenna Jameson type, right? Just picking a name, that had this huge presence. Now it almost seems like the drive is for girls who are quote unquote normal, living very normal lives, that kind of reality porn that has become very normal. And sort of piggybacking on that, the most common search terms in most porn databases is teen and rough. So you have this new group of generation of children watching, in their mind, what they think is normal sex, with a lot of hitting, choking, slapping, very violent intercourse. It's borderline abusive, but they see that as, this is how we're supposed to have sex. And you'll do some of these interviews and these kids will tell you what happened. And it's almost like you're watching a porno. Like they saw this and said, okay, this is how I'm supposed
Yeah.
to do that.
We've seen that on some cases where
Yeah.
the teenagers are filming themselves and the things they're doing are very advanced things
Yeah.
that, I don't know. That was not my experience as a
No,
teenager.
no.
And so, yeah, I don't know. I guess the reason that I was kind of bringing up the girls that were marketing themselves, it was Snapchat that they were using at the
Yeah.
time, is just as a parent, make sure that you are reviewing anything that can message, whether it's, I don't care if it's Fortnite or Roblox or whatever the thing is, you got to look at those messages and see what they're sending. Periodically. Like we had, uh, well, I won't go into that personal story, but you got to look at it, because it will surprise you. And at least in the cases that I've worked, there's another case in the office now where a kid's on Roblox and her friend's dad started using the child's account to message
Oh,
this friend that's like 9, 10.
yeah.
You think, when you are a normal person and you don't have a sexual attraction to children, you think it's almost impossible to imagine. You're like, what are you talking about? My kid
Yeah.
is 8 or 9 or 6 or 4 or whatever the age is. And it's what you're attracted to has nothing to do with what other people are attracted to. And I went to a class by it's a group called Trident they put on,
Mm-hmm.
and they had they're not affiliated with SEALs or anything, but it's Graham Hill, Larry Bronstein, and he's going to kill me for not remembering, Jim Tanner. They have this thing, but anyway, they showed this picture in the training where it's a man and a woman and there's a dog on a leash and it looks like a nice day in the park or whatever. And they said, what do you see? And they started calling out to class members, what do you see? And they're like, well, a boyfriend and girlfriend out for a walk, a husband and wife out for a walk, whatever. And he goes, okay, cool. That's what a normal person sees. But a pervert is going to look at that and say, I wonder if I can make that woman have sex with that dog.
Mm-hmm.
And it was eye-opening to me
Yeah.
because it's not where my brain goes at all. Like, how would you even, like, how do you go through life looking at everything through a weird sexualized filter like that. Um, and these are the types of people that we're up against. They look normal. They might go to the football game and eat nachos with you or whatever, but their their brain is in a different place, and they see everything through a filter that you don't see it through. And that was really eye opening to me because I think that we have a tendency to just say, well, whatever I think is normal or whatever
Yeah.
I'm attracted to or into, that's probably normal. So most people probably feel that way, and I don't know. That's not everybody,
Yeah.
that's for sure.
Most of them are the ones that I've seen that end up having fairly, pretty righteous cases. They're usually intelligent. They're usually a fairly normal member of society. I hate, it, it makes people paranoid, but I'd be lying if I said it wasn't a lot of people involved in schools or childcare or just some of the things that you don't necessarily want to think are happening. I'm not trying to instill paranoia, but that is kind of the pool where they'll insert themselves into scenarios or places or things that will give them opportunity, which a lot of what they do as predators, they're looking for that opportunity.
Yeah, you got to think. I mean, if you're attracted to blonde soccer milfs, right? Whatever, like that's you're. Let's say you're single, right? Again, not to be the morality police, but you're out there looking, right?
Yeah,
You're going to go where that person is,
sure.
right? And that's
Yeah.
going to be running trails or soccer games or what, I don't know, whatever that person
Mm-hmm.
is, you're going to go there. And if you are interested, if you have an exclusive sexual attraction to the children, you're going to where those children are. I mean,
Exactly.
they're in trampoline parks. They're in these little, I've worked cases like that where guys, he was active in the youth group and then he worked at a trampoline park. And it's a
Mm-hmm.
little weird because he's like in his mid 20s. You know what I mean? Like a little old to be like a teenager just working a job, but not so old to be suspicious and just kind of skating through.
Yeah.
And I'm with you where I don't want to cast like unnecessary, suspicion on people, but like just taking your kid to the trampoline park and dropping them off and then going to like leaving without any like looking around,
Yeah.
I mean, look around a little bit because if those people are sexually attracted to children, they will put themselves in a place where they have access to children,
For sure.
just period.
And going back to the parenting thing, something that I've seen through training, but also experience in a variety of other avenues, they will always look at who's basically who has a parent that's involved or not involved. They will
Oh yeah.
strategically pick people that they know don't have a good parental structure. So if you're going to that place, whatever it is, I don't want to keep saying trampoline park because they're going to go out of business. But if we
Yeah.
had like, anywhere, right? You go to a birthday party, you go to someone's friend's house that you've never been to. What's the first thing that every good parent should have? Well, let me meet their parents. That's a great thing to do. Because if that threat is there, then 9 times out of 10, the person who's the perpetrator will probably avoid your child because they know that there's good communication or at least some cause for concern from the parent. Unfortunately, most kids that I've seen that have been victims of stuff like that, there was some degree of almost like reconnaissance done by the perpetrator beforehand, and that's where grooming comes in. It can be light or it can be direct. And there's a really creepy video. I forget his name. It was an older video from like the 80s, I think, where he was talking about how he would purposely look for. He's out of custody in this scenario. He would pay really close attention to the kids who sort of had that unstable family structure. He could be a friend. He could be someone they could confide in. And again, we're not trying to make people paranoid, but as a parent, if something doesn't feel right, act on it. That you're not going to be faulted for pulling your kid out of a potentially dangerous scenario, because I assure you, if it goes the opposite direction, you'll spend the rest of your life wondering what you could have done differently. And for anything like that to occur to a kid, it drastically changes their life forever. And as a parent, I don't think you'll ever forgive yourself knowing that you could have done something. And granted, there are scenarios that we can't control, but I could only imagine what that would feel like if you thought something and didn't act on it, and then something happened to your child. I just couldn't even imagine.
Yeah, my big red flag is we have we have a person that's in kind of the periphery of our kind of family and friend group or whatever, and every time I had been there, I haven't I purposefully avoided this person for years now because of it. But he was always so focused on my daughter, and it was always asking after my daughter. Oh, and he would ignore me. He would shake my hand, and then everything was about my daughter. Oh, where's she at? What's going on? And he was like trying to be normal, but he also told like some kind of like off color like sexual jokes to me, and I was like, I don't know if you're trying to feel me out, but like I'm not the one, dude. Like,
Yeah.
and to me, like that is a red flag. Like adults should be oriented towards adults, and adult men. Yeah, hey kid, how you doing? Whatever. But like, if you exclusively want to talk to me for news about my daughter, like, no, that's not going to work, dude. Like,
Yeah.
no.
And that's a red flag that I think most people, you and I, again, skewed perspective, but I feel like the average parent would go, that's weird. And if it is weird, well then, you don't have to necessarily act on it, but maybe have a plan, talk to your kid. Hey, Uncle Joe or whoever. You can do it in a way that won't make them think something's wrong or, become hyper paranoid. But yeah, I really can't really hammer enough just that communication is so critical these days with kids, and just talking to them about I really liked what you said earlier, and I'm going to do it later when I pick up my son, but changing the question, right? Did you have a good day at school? Yes. Okay. And yeah, I like how there's just so many different ways we can communicate. But no, for and again, I feel like we've kind of, okay, so just to be clear, most kids are safe, most parents are good, but I think the baseline is that every parent should have a plan in case there is something that comes up, and you'll thank yourself down the road for creating that natural sort of communication highway, because if you don't start that at a young age, it becomes really difficult to start talking to your kids when they're teenagers. My son is 14, and we have a great relationship. We communicate, but I mean, yeah, it does take a little bit of work for me to, not that he's being deceptive, but you kind of have to ask the same question 3 times before you might get the answer. Well, things are okay, but I kind of had this thing happen at school, and you know, my big thing with my kids is honesty. I really tell them, like, hey man, if you're honest with me, it's gonna be fine. Like, I'm not telling you won't get in trouble, but don't be afraid to tell me anything. And looking back on the way I was raised, my dad had the same concept, but I still lied to him. But
Yeah,
I
of course.
knew, yeah, right. But I was a lot more open than I would have been had I just been living in this sort of sustained fear that I'm going to get in trouble for XYZ. But I knew deep down that even if my dad didn't know, and I came to him with this, whatever it was, that he would listen to me. And my dad was very good about not getting upset. He was very calm. And oddly enough, the calmer he got, the more deeper crap I knew I was in.
Yeah, yeah.
But that was just huge. And especially nowadays where, most of our communication is digital, I really, like, it drives me nuts when my son texts me when we're in the house. It's like, no, like, this is not, no, come find me and ask me this question, or, call me, or, I just can't put enough emphasis on talking to your kids and making that normal. And yeah, I don't know what their future will look like, because how old are you?
41.
So you're part of the group that I'm in. I'll be 40 soon, but I feel like we were kind of the last group, maybe early 90s. I'm horrible at math, but essentially whenever I didn't have a smartphone until I was in my mid 20s, give or take.
They went out.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they weren't even a thing. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
and I feel like for our group, we have this really cool piece of technology. I mean, social media is a double-edged sword. What we're doing right now is a positive for it, but there's so many negatives, and I just don't know. And this sort of blends over to cop world, where I was talking to Adam from Police Post about a year ago, and he made the joke, but it's true, of this trainee could probably give me a better description in emojis than they could actually talking to me. And a lot of the things that you've talked about today, and I think that, cop or not, there's just much to be said about how we communicate and how we talk to each other. For classes and stuff, I did want to talk about this too. You mentioned the website and stuff, but for people who are interested or they want to look into this more, can we talk about some of the stuff that you guys offer for training and the blog and stuff like that for those who are interested?
Yeah, sure. I appreciate that. So we have so our business is called Modern Interviewing Solutions, and the offering that we have now is a 2-day course. It's a 2-day, 20-hour course. We found that people kind of lose interest about 4 days. It's a lot. It's more. I'm a working detective, so I have cases and people expecting me. So it's easy. We came up with this. It's effective. It teaches the fundamentals. Everywhere we've gone, top rated. We've taught portions of it at the Crimes Against Children conference in Dallas the last 3 years. We've taught it around the Central Texas region. So we have courses. We have one in Dallas that's actually free to attend because the Dallas Children's Advocacy Center pays for it, which is really generous. That one, it's on our website, but that one is in March. And then we're teaching at a New Mexico child abuse conference in April. And then we're going to Indiana in May. Some people saw us at the Crimes Against Children conference and hired us. So people love it. I think the thing that sets it apart, the thing that makes that training so good, is a couple things. One is that my partner and I are both active interviewers. He's promoted, but he still gets reps in the box. And on any given day, I might be in the interview box. And so I think people, especially cops, sniff out bullshit and they sense when you're about it or not. And so I think that recency and applicable experience pulls people in. And another thing beyond the content, which is teaching the fundamentals, is it's scenario based. And so I had this idea to design it around scenarios. So groups we have 4 groups, and they each get a scenario, and that scenario is something they work with throughout the class. And so we'll have a practical where they call the suspect, and so we'll have another practical where they design questions, and then it all culminates on the second day where they do the interrogation. And so they build themes, and they use accusations, and they build this accusation based off of that scenario. And some of the introverts in the group are like dying because they have to do a lot of talking, or they try to hide in the group. But every single person, and it's really good because I've learned, especially through teaching the class, because we're teaching it, and then as soon as you say now do it, it's shocking to see. Some people are like ready to go; they're pros immediately, and some people like. Maybe we're so focused on notes or nodding along that it's that when it comes time to do it, it can kind of fall apart. And then what's so gratifying to see is at the end of that second day, when they get through those scenarios, they leave with confidence, and they're super excited, and they're like, we get success stories from people writing in and saying, "Hey, I did that thing and it worked. Hey, I have this big case coming in. Can you guys work with me on it?"
Awesome.
And we'll kind of work with them to strategize and stuff. So it's been really successful. We wouldn't teach something that wasn't good, ethical, and that people liked. And so it's been really successful. And so we're working on. My ideal would be to do one class a month. We still have to teach I say have to. I volunteer. My partner and I volunteer to teach our agency. So in fact, I'm teaching tomorrow, and the next day we're teaching our course to the agency and surrounding agencies, and then I'm teaching at the detective school the next day. So that's our business, and right now that's what we have. It's called Fundamentals of Interview and Interrogation. It's 2 days. It offers credit in Texas. We're in talks to kind of either expand the course into an extra day for a little more advanced stuff. Or to work on a patrol course is like the most requested thing. People really want that patrol course. And that's something we're looking at. In terms of a blog, I write under, I started under a pseudonym, but now that I'm moving towards publishing a book, it's just, the pseudonym, I don't know how I'm going to deal with that situation, because I have readers under that. And so if it just
Yeah.
transitioned into using my name, I mean, I
Formerly
don't
known
know.
as or something. Yeah.
Formerly known
Yeah.
as, I
Right.
don't
Yeah.
know. But yeah, so my blog's at lewispurdy.substack.com. That's lewispurdy.substack.com. I write when I can since I'm focused on the book. My ideal is about one article a month. Yeah, it's been really successful. People read it. Like the lady who came up with strategic use of evidence, Dr. Hartwig, she read the article that I wrote. It's the pinned article on there on strategic use of evidence. She shared it with her, readers and followers and stuff. So, yeah, it's been successful. I have people that read it. I have one guy in Kentucky, a polygrapher that Eddie Pearson. Shout out to Eddie if he's listening.
Nice.
Almost every time I write an article, will respond and write in and tell me about his experiences. So, yeah, I really love it.
Awesome. And because I'm curious, what is the, I guess, plan? Do you want to do cop stuff forever, or do you have an interest in anything else? I mean, it's kind of neat because you have all these things in the fire right now. And for my own curiosity, I mean, you're 40. I don't know what retirement's like in Texas, but do you have plans to keep teaching or anything for your future that you have in mind?
Yeah. So in terms of to get to full retirement without having to pay any money to leave early, I've got about 5.5 years to that. And so our retirement system is really good here. I will reach retirement one way or another.
Sure.
There's an option to buy out in about 2.5 years, but it's pretty expensive. So,
Yeah.
and I love what I do. I love my coworkers. There's stuff that I don't like on some days, but my work is meaningful and I really enjoy it. But in the future, I'm hoping. I told my partner, I said, I think we've had enough success with this course. I think we'll be turning away work within a year. I think we're pretty close. Like it is. I think this coming year might be the last year where we have to kind of hustle to, talk to people and have them host us and stuff. I think in 2026, it's not going to be a thing. So I would love to going down the road to consult on cases. I think that'd be fun to kind of live in retirement and do some teaching like once a month. And I have, I have cases from different agencies where they'll send me a case and ask me to strategize on it. I've done
Nice.
interviews for different units, for homicide unit and other places. I think it could get complicated if you but like my ideal would be, somewhere in nowhere, Colorado has a major, unsolved double homicide or something.
Sure.
And they're, hey, we need help. And you go in, you either do the interview or strategize with them about doing the interview and talk about that. I think would be cool. I do think it could lead to problems for getting like subpoenaed for court and stuff.
Yeah.
If you're out,
Yeah.
you're teaching in, Maine and you get a subpoena for
Yeah.
Colorado the next day, that's a problem, So I don't know. Yeah, I'm not sure what that would look like, but yeah, I hope to do that. I have a lot of interests. My family's really active. I love spending time with my family. I like running and skiing and collecting, and my time will be full one way or another, whether it's cop stuff
Good.
or not. But yeah,
I can't stress that enough for guys who this career will come to an end one way or the other. Either you want it to or you don't, and to have something else to do when it's finally time to let go is very important. So whether it's hobbies or something related to this, I've never seen a cop just stop working and then be happy. I've never seen it.
yeah,
They're happy
yeah.
for 6 months and then it stops.
I know we're wrapping up too, but if I had one plug too, just something else to pay attention to is mind your money, guys. Like, make sure that you're investing, like, fill up any sort of deferred compensation or anything that you have. Do it early, do as much as you can afford. It doesn't seem like much until it does. And it starts, once that compound interest kicks in, starts going parabolic on your return. You're like, oh my God, I wouldn't be, you've got to, for both mental health as well as just taking care of your own business. Don't be a slave to the job, like make sure that you work your job, do your thing, and be smart with your money. And because it gives you a lot of freedom afterwards too. And so I think I do this job because I want to do this job. I think there's other things that I could do, but I want to do this job. I love this job. but make sure if you manage your money, you'll have that option. And that could be a conversation for a whole other day. But I just want to one plug
Sure.
where I see some cops, well, in Texas, it's always the lifted truck and the newest $6,500 rifle with thermal scope or whatever. And it's like, that's good if you can afford it. And so
I think that's a national thing. It's just you start making decent money, and I forget the 3 B's: booze, babes, and bills. Yeah, be careful with those things.
Yeah,
so.
I quit drinking back in 2020 too. So,
Good.
hey, do it or don't. I'm just saying, it's a risky thing for a profession that's got tons of trauma involved
for sure.
in it. So,
lastly, though, the book. I know it's not out yet, but I want to just sort of throw that in there so people don't forget about it when it's out. Even self-published, is that going to be like an Amazon thing or something they can look for? And if so, where would they find it for the future?
Yeah. Thanks, man. I really appreciate. I've listened to some podcasts, and they never plug the person's stuff, and you're doing great. I really appreciate you on that. So I will definitely have it on Amazon one way or another.
Cool.
If I have to self-publish or whatever, I'm hoping I can get a publisher. I've got some leads. I'm working on some book proposals and stuff, and so that's definitely in the cards. But yeah, following my blog at lewispurdy.substack.com, it'll certainly be announced there. If people are into training or looking for this stuff, people have loved our course everywhere we've gone. The only criticism that we get consistently is it should be longer. We want this course to be longer, and that's a compliment, I think. So. We'd love to work with anybody that's looking for it. Our stuff works, and I think that we marry that science-based with practicality. And if it doesn't work, we don't teach it. So we'd love to work with that, and it's been real enjoyable talking with you.
Cool. Well, Darrel, thank you. Darrel Lambert, ladies and gentlemen, I had a great time. I'm definitely going to have you back on in the future. And again, thank you to Mr. Sean Kendrick for the connect. And
hey, Sean.
Guys, hope you had a great Thanksgiving. I keep saying we, it's just me. Probably back in the new year, if I'm being honest, for episodes. But lots of good stuff coming down the pipe over the next couple of weeks. So again, Darrel, thank you for being here, and I'm sure everyone's going to love this. Looking forward to the next one. And if I don't talk to you before, have a Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays.
Yeah, you as well.
Thank you.